Have you ever picked up a Mario game and think to yourself, what if I can't jump? Welp, now I'm stuck. The simple action of jumping in the game seems to be as shallow as a puddle, but is in fact as deep as an ocean. Sure, some games have jumps that seem to be implemented simply to be there as a jump rather than being useful and furthering the gameplay. Sorry, The Last of Us Part 2, your jump is quite bad. However, by either making your game revolve around jumps like Mario games, 2D Sonic games, Metroidvanias, it opens up a lot of possibilities and lets the player express themselves more freely. However, on the complete contrary of this, if a game restricts the player by not letting them jump, the tone and expression a player might output into the game changes drastically. Metal Gear Solid 5 does not have a jump button, and although it might be tedious in certain situations, the wide range of tools in the sandbox lets you find a way to work around not being able to jump. Never expected I would start a video off by talking about jumping, but here we are. Jumping is one of the main ways we move around in games, and movement is our gateway in immersing ourselves in the game. Sure, good stories can reel us in, but if there is no real gameplay, it ends up becoming a movie that we are seeing rather than experiencing, you know? And naturally, simply moving around in a game does not mean that you are immersed in the game, as there are many games that feel terrible to play that disconnect you from the world rather than bring you in. From 2D platformers to linear story games, point and clicks, visual novels, and so much more, let's take a look at the art of movement in video games, and where else to start than with the first example that I gave, the jump. Look how fluid the movement is here, and if you look closely, it stems from the jump. Mario games, the 3D ones, revolve around the jump and play around with its concept. Sunshine has the flood that extends the jump's duration, Galaxy plays around with gravity, and Odyssey gives you Cappy that grants you more airtime to decide your next move. In these scenarios, the jump is vital in order to let the players express themselves, and jumping, not just in Mario games, is a vital aspect in letting the players do what they please. But how does jumping help immerse the players, and what constitutes as a good jump? I think I answered the question. A good jump immerses the player, either by giving the player new forms of movement, or by being grounded in the world that it's set. I kinda dissed it earlier in the video, but take the jump from The Last of Us Part 2. Yes, compared to jumps in other games, it's absolutely terrible. Same goes for Link's jump in Breath of the Wild. However, what these two jumps manage to do is fit the realism that the world is based in. The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that is very much based upon a realistic setting, and if you take a look outside right now, I doubt you will see your friends or strangers jumping and parkouring around the streets like Mario does, so seeing Ellie barely manage to jump is a reflection of the realism the game is going for. And in the case of Breath of the Wild, Link is a Hylian, a humanoid race, giving him human properties, with him having to rely on his equipment and gadgets to go toe-to-toe with the wide range of enemies. The jump here, although very minor in both scenarios, helps ground the game, literally speaking as well, in the world setting. On the flip side, platformers give the players lots of capabilities with its jump. Jumps can either be super high with a quick button tap, or you can jump really high by holding the button down longer, giving me a lot more airtime. Take a look at Sonic, both 3D and 2D. Couple the jump along with the speed that Sonic can build up, the possibilities are endless. Take a loop-de-loop and fling yourself off at the right time and you fly into the sky, or miss the timing completely and down you fall. The jump gives the players a higher form of risk and reward. Fail the jump and you fall down to the lower levels of the stage, and the game becomes more tedious than it would be if you made the jump, as the higher areas of these levels reward the player for playing well and helps them keep their speed going, completing it a little faster and being just that much more fun to play. But you could also mix up the jumps to create scenarios that are relevant to your playstyle. Let's say for instance the top path requires too much specific jumps to keep the speed going. Instead, you could choose a smaller jump to choose the lower path and increase your speed from the lower path to enter the top path later, which could be more fun for your playstyle. This might not directly be how jumps help give the player this freedom, as it's more the level design, but the way a level is designed is made in a way that it gives the player the opportunity to achieve certain movement capabilities, as you need to learn the way the movement works in the game to be able to pull off some of these liberties, and the jump plays a vital role in this case. But what if the game takes away the jump? Well, now let's move on to the next movement art that games can pull off, where there is no jump button. So let's move on to survival horror titles, some 3D action adventure games, Metal Gear Solid, and Dark Souls. stripping a game of its jump effectively removes a whole different plane of motion that the player is now unable to fulfill. This leaves us with two outcomes. A, the game loses a core way of movement, making the game feel less good to play. Or, the better outcome, B, the game focuses all its energy into the current forms of movement that it has now to make them feel as good as possible. This is where the next categories of games come in, that focus solely on moving around on the ground plane. These games are either top-down or isometric games or 3D action-adventure games that don't give you a jump button. These could be old-school Zelda games, Tunic, The Last of Us, and God of War 2018 to name a few. What these games have to highlight their movement capabilities are outside factors that make movement more fun. The first two I listed give the player a wide range of tools to do whatever they please with, whilst the latter two use movement as a way to progress their stories. The first two, older Zelda games like A Link to the Past and Tunic, are top-down games that give the player lots of movement capabilities without really letting them jump. Sure, in the older Zelda games you gain access to Rock's Feather, which grants you the ability to jump, or in Tunic where a certain item can let you cross gaps. However, the focus in these games is how to let the player feel accomplished while playing them. That's why in these games there are tons of puzzles that put your game knowledge to the test. There will be instances and puzzles that require you to cross a gap perhaps, and the game leaves it in your hands as to how you want to come about figuring out how to cross this gap in particular that would easily be jumpable if there was a jump button. And by creating puzzles like these, the movements in the games are an art at letting the player feel smart and that they're doing something super creative, even though the devs made it seem like that this was all your own doing. Another type of game that bridges between the use of gadgets and progressing the story are the classic Resident Evil games from a top-down perspective. The classic survival horror titles give you little, and I mean little, forms of movement, tank controls, constantly fixed health, encouraging defensive play, and either ranged or close quarters combat. However, by giving you so many limited forms of movement, the game essentially creates a reverse effect where so little ways of finding a solution to a problem that it then becomes far bigger. Knowing your way around an area, you could either bait the zombies one after the other, use a shotgun, start a long knife fight, stun them, and run past them. Survival horror games make sure that you deliberately think about each move you do and that every single action you do counts towards helping you reach the end goal. The last category I have were those that use their narrative to encourage movement. I know some of you might find it a bit surprising that I name-dropped God of War 2018, but for me, that's how I felt about it. Sure, there are lots of ways for you to deal with the enemies that the game throws at you, with new combos to learn, rune spells, and using Atreus' bow to its full effect. However, as much as the combo is fun, I strongly felt that these were all just smaller mechanics working together to make me progress the story. I didn't find myself enjoying the combat as much, as I was more focused on the story, leading me to just mash my way through, until it doesn't work anymore, and where I then stopped. I'll get back to playing God of War 2018 sometime soon, but that's how I feel the movement was used to progress its story, albeit in a way that was not really suited for me. The best example I can think of where the narrative played strong influence in the movement was The Last of Us. If you haven't played it, you should go out right now and buy it. Not the PC port though. The Last of Us has quite a simple story, but what it does extremely well is character development and chemistry. The Last of Us isn't really a game that immerses you in its world, but makes you experience the world and story that it's telling masterfully. Ellie and Joel talk a lot during their trek across America, not just in cutscenes but during the game, and that's a form of storytelling that is hard to pull off, but done well, it can create some of the best stories imaginable because the narrative is always there, slightly pushing you forward. Nier Automata is also a game that does this super well, with the biggest moments in the story hitting hard because it was built up from the story that we experienced by playing the game, not watching the game. But back to The Last of Us. Although I prefer Last of Us Part 2 for its story and deeper gameplay, I think Part 1 excels in its way of natural storytelling whilst playing, acting as a minor catalyst to push you forward through its runtime. Now, this next section might seem a bit strange for some of you. Clicking, as in point-and-click games. Disco Elysium, Monkey Island, visual novels like Doki Doki, and so much more. These games don't have full-on movement systems, but rather just you clicking onwards. You might be wondering how this is a form of movement in the game, but hear me out. It's movement in the sense that you are progressing, which sounds like any other form of movement in the game, but how does that make it differ from moving forward in a platformer or a story-driven game? Well, typically the world stands still and is waiting for your direct input in order to continue. You are the one and only variable able to move it forward, and your motive for moving forward is primarily focused on learning more about the established world. Take Disco Elysium, which is in my opinion one of the best written games of all time. It's an RPG where you take on the role as a detective trying to uncover not only the mystery of a murder, but also the mystery of who you are and finding yourself. What makes Disco Elysium so intriguing is how its story is set up, from the world and its locations, to the wide range of characters who all have their quirks, to the choices that you make that greatly alter the way the story unfolds. All these factors here, although don't appear to have anything in common with movement, play a huge role in how you move forward in the story as you are clicking and reading to progress. Same goes for visual novels where the text, dialogue, characters and mystery are the parts that keep you moving forward. Unlike more action-focused games like a Metroid or a Resident Evil, the writing is not the primary factor there, rather its gameplay loop making its primary factor of encouraging the player to move forward, whereas point-and-click games, these need to have extraordinary good writing to keep the player engaged and act as a catalyst to keep you progressing. Of course, there are some games that draw a fine line between general movement and story progression to encourage the player to move forward. God of War, which again I'm not that much of a fan of, or a Zelda title. They have both the fun gameplay loop that encourages you to keep playing to get more of a feel for it, and have narratives that provide mystery and great writing to keep you engaged in the process. I guess that just makes the great games when they combine both. Right, although the last section of this video may have deviated a bit away from general movement in games, I still think that strong writing is more subtly way of the many ways games can move us, literally speaking as well, forward. Roguelikes like Hades or Dead Cells that feel so good to play repeatedly for the variety of situations they can put us through, or games that incorporate some form of jumping or something akin to it, which gives you a new plane for movement, or more ways for you to express yourself in-game. Getting the player engaged enough in the game to keep them playing is an art of movement. If you think about it, unless you try to beat every game you touch, there's at least one game where you either felt a lack of enjoyment to play the game or motivation to progress it, which stems from the fact that the game was not able to move you forward. I guess that does have its own pros, as it can help you appreciate the many ways that other games are able to move you forward, showing how movement is truly an art. And with that, welcome to the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed this video essay on movement in games. If you enjoyed it, a like would be appreciated, and a comment with your thoughts would be nice to hear as well. And if you didn't enjoy the video, a dislike and a comment mean a lot in helping me improve the content that I can make. If you want to see more from me, a subscription comes a long way in helping me out. With that said, how are you doing? Estimating on when I release this video, Tears of the Kingdom should already be out, so I'm just 99% sure that that's what I'll be playing for the foreseeable future. But what games are you playing as of late? Leave them down below, but yeah, I should probably get going. Again, thanks for watching all the way to the end, it really does mean a lot, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a good day, night, and rest of your week, and with that, Storm out.